Okay, hello and welcome to YUI Open Hours for Thursday, February 23rd. I guess it's Friday where you are, Mosen. Forgive me if I just call you Mosen, because that's how I know you.
That's okay.
So we're here with Eamon Brosnan, who is YUI contributor extraordinaire, who's helped a lot with data table patches in the past, and is a pillar of support in the IRC channel and YUI IRC channel on Freenode. And he's been working on a project called Buildy for quite a while. And we'll get a look over that and the API of that and how it works and how hopefully this can replace Builder. The YUI Builder project is an Ant project right now, and it's it's the burden that any Ant project is, and so the prospect of being able to work with a node-based solution for doing builds and things like this is very exciting. And there are a number of us on the team that have wanted to see a node-based build solution for YUI for quite a long time, and just time isn't available to do that. So before we get into the content, Ryan just pushed up a new video out onto our YouTube channel, which is actually talked about on the YUI Theater and YUI blog. I'm sorry, YUI blog. We post up all of the new videos that we push out to YUI Theater. And this was from a Bayjax event just a couple of weeks ago, and Stephen Woods from the Flickr team was doing some great research about responsive HTML interfaces and supporting mobile platforms, so in your tablets and your smartphones. And this talk was really fantastic. If you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend going to check that out. And that's about it for news. There is PR3, I guess, is on its way in. I guess it's closing up. Was it the 2nd of March? Is it, Ryan? Do you know, Eric?
Yeah, the 2nd of March is right.
2nd of March.
Or thereabouts, yeah.
Okay. And so we'll be pushing PR3 the very beginning of March, and then we're going to be going into a test slam for the next couple of weeks before the GA launch around mid-March. And everything seems to be going just fine, and there's always head experimenting on the head or playing with PR2. If you were stymied by the y.plugin.base bug that was in PR2, which causes all sorts of mayhem when you're trying to extend, or you have anything that's a subclass of y.plugin.base. That was fixed right away after PR2 was launched, but obviously there's no intermediate PR until PR3 at that point. But so if you rely on that, then it's worth checking out Head, because Head has been pretty stable, and although it's a little bit more work, obviously. But Rockstar still has the nightly builds, right? Although he said the combo handler was having some trouble the other day.
Yeah, I don't know the URL for that, though. I don't know if you have it handy.
I don't have it handy. If somebody in chat has it handy, then stick it in the chat for sure. But I guess without further ado, let's get into the details here, and if we finish up with going over Buildy, and we'll see if Eamon, you have time to talk about your ybuild project as well. So I'm going to hand over control screen sharing to you, and that's all your show. Okay, go for it.
Okay. Just share this. So, first thing I wanted to explain was that the difference between the Buildy project and the ybuild project that I've got going here. Basically, I wanted to keep it the same as the separation we had between Ant and YUI Builder. So Ant is the thing that YUI Builder runs on, obviously. And Ant is sort of a generic build tool, whereas YUI Builder is to build YUI. Sorry, I call it YUI all the time. So with a generic build system, that's what I built Buildy for. I wanted just something that could carry out all of those tasks that Ant usually carries out, like copying, moving files, processing files, things like that. And with the ybuild project, that's basically what you use to build like gallery modules, for instance. So
And you're already using it to build your own gallery modules, right?
Yeah, and for my internal projects as well, I just use it to build all of those modules because it's faster.
Yeah.
So at the moment, ybuild's pretty basic. It's mainly for building modules which have a bit of JavaScript in them and style sheets and any other assets you want to include. At the moment, doesn't include the localization, the language modules. But you know, it's a work in progress, and I definitely take everyone's suggestions very seriously. Stephen had some really good suggestions for it, so I'll definitely be looking at things like maybe watch folders, just ways of making the build process less intrusive in the whole developing of YUI modules. Okay, so I'll talk about Buildy first. This is, you guys can see my GitHub screen, okay?
Yeah, it's coming through. Actually, if you could zoom in a bit, that would be good.
Sure. Okay.
There you go.
So I just wanted to highlight the syntax that I have for Buildy. Buildy is just, it's really just an API for building things. Rather than describing its own language, just use JavaScript, why not? I mean, you can define your own variables and stuff like that and break out into any kind of crazy JavaScript you want to do. So in Buildy, basically, the main object you're dealing with is this queue object that represents sort of a single line of execution, I guess. Everything's sort of generated and then piped to the next task in the list. So the queue object is the object that's controlling all of those tasks happening in sequence. In this example, I've got a files task, and that just generates a list of files that I want to operate on. I concatenate them, run them through, in this case, for the minification, I'm using Uglify. And then I write out the file at the end. So this was basically just an API so that I could unify all of the tools that are available, like all of the node modules that you find, like JSLint module, Uglify for doing minification, modules for minifying style sheets as well. Basically,
so then what you're doing here is you're giving the individual tasks a name, or you identify them. You identify the tasks by a name string, and then that name string is linked up to some other functionality elsewhere in the system, right? I guess we'll get to that later then.
No, that's okay. I can explain that. So when you call that task method, it looks up the name of the task from sort of an internal registry of tasks. You can write your own tasks to adapt other node modules you might find you might like to include into a build process. So then those will be available by name, and they will receive the parameters of the second parameter. So yeah, you can add anything you like to it, basically, and it sort of just it standardizes the way that all of these tools work with each other. So as long as there's a task written for it with Buildy, you can include it in that build process.
So maybe we could go over what one of the implementations of a task is and see how that standardization takes place.
Sure.
But
let's just. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Okay. So, pretty much everything's on the GitHub README if you want to go over it. This is my example of hello world task, not very original, but anyway. So what happens in the task is it gets an object called state from Buildy, and then that object also identifies what kind of state it is, whether it's a list of file names, it's a string, or it's a number of strings. And then it's up to you to handle those different types of inputs as in a default sort of way. It also gives you a status object, which you omit complete or failed, depending on what the exit status of your task is. So really, between your custom function being called and you omitting the event, you can do anything you like. You can probably use a child process if you like. If something's not available within Node, if you really have to execute something else, you could use a child process. But basically, yeah, the control is over to you, and it's up to your task to set that state object again at the end of it.
So the promise is how it links back into the queue chain?
Yeah, I've actually changed this to status. That's kind of a better name, because the status object is something that you emit different events on, and it informs Buildy about what's happening in your particular task, and then Buildy can take a decision on whether to log that information or not.
Okay, and then the state is all of what has been fed into it from the prior tasks?
Yeah, the state object just encapsulates the output from the previous task, and then it's up to you to set whatever the new state will be and identify what kind of thing it is. The reason there's a different type for each for the state object is because you can set up default behaviors for how to handle files and strings and things like that. Quite a few of the tasks are dealing with the contents of the file as a string, and then they only write out at the end. But you can have different behaviors depending on what type of input comes into your task.
Do you have any, well, what sort of core tasks are already in Buildy then?
Okay, so I've written down a list of built-in tasks. The core tasks are very much based on the YUI builder, just to get that amount of functionality so that we can build YUI modules. But I'll definitely be adding to it later on. The main task at the start is the files task, which can take globs and things like that to generate a list of files that you are operating on. And then basically all of the other tasks operate on those set of files or read them into strings and then perform different tasks with them. So there's a task for concatenation, we have lint tasks for CSS and JavaScript, and we have minify tasks for CSS and JavaScript.
So then if I wanted to, for example, change the minify from using uglify to using YUI compressor, for example,
yeah,
then
you could definitely, you can write your own task file which can be added to the start of your Buildy script. So what you would do is you would probably have a separate subdirectory for tasks and write one file per task. And in that, you'd have a similar implementation to the Hello World demo that I've got. If you like, you can look inside my code repository for tasks. All of the default tasks are listed in there, and they're loaded the same way you would in your own program. But
I guess the API for declaring a task in the queue or adding a task into the queue, there's that additional parameter which is some sort of configuration. So in theory, there could be a minify step. There could be a minify task that had a configuration for which engine to use, for example, or a lint that would fork off to JS lint or to JS hint or something like that. They could do some logic forking inside of the individual tasks.
Yeah, we definitely could do some forking inside the individual tasks. At the moment, I've just got them on a different name. So if you had YUI compressor, for instance, you might add a YUI compress task, and then at the start of the script, you can interact with the registry object, which is just maintains a list of the tasks that are available. I've got an example of that inside the repository. If you check it out, there's a custom task example, and you can either load a directory full of tasks, or you can add them one file at a time if you just want to pull in specific tasks. And so when you add your YUI compressor, I almost said YUI, task,
either works fine. We know what you're talking about.
Then that will become available as a task, and you just name it as you would any other task, and it'll pass through YUI compressor.
So speaking of, you mentioned forking tasks earlier.
Oh, yes.
I'm really intrigued by this idea of splitting into two parallel tasks. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. One of the things I realized when I was looking at YUI Builder was that a lot of the processing steps didn't need to happen multiple times. You could just, for instance, that the regular expression that strips out the logging statements, from that you would get a file that you would use for the minified version and also just for the raw version. So I had to make a task that would split at a particular moment. So in this case, let me just see if I got one here. Yep. The forking task just takes an object literal with the name of new queues to fork into. So when it executes the fork task, it's really just making a bunch of child queues. Everything before that will execute sequentially, but everything in the fork task executes in parallel and asynchronously. So underneath the fork task, they can execute in any order, basically, but it is really fast. So in each
that's nice. So we can actually have the fork doing the CSS concatenation from the source files while we're also doing the processing of the raw version and minified version, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
But you can maintain multiple forks inside of a queue.
Yeah, and you can also launch multiple queues at the same time. So if one's held up on some kind of operation, the other ones will just keep going. And in ybuild, I have it so that the lint task is running completely separately to the actual building. So that seems to work out pretty well. Yeah. So each fork is executed in the context of the queue that it was just created, and it receives a copy of this state from the previous task. So in this particular example, you've got a concatenated version of the files coming out of the previous task. and in the fork task, each of these is receiving that concatenated version. So this one's writing it out, and the other one's chaining it to another minify task and then writing it out.
That's
So that's
pretty
how
awesome.
the forking works.
That's great. I love the really concise API that makes it very clear what's going on, and it all happens in very little code.
One thing.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. I was just going to mention one thing I saw in there that was interesting was the template task, and that you'd chosen to use handlebars. And maybe if you want to talk about that at some point too. Cool.
Yeah, sure. I'm basically going along with Ryan's usage of handlebars for the Select project. That seems to be the YUI standard library for dealing with templating. But it's not impossible to add your own templating engine. You could add anything you like, basically. There goes my phone. So the templating task just basically takes the input from the previous task and adds it to a reserved variable, and then you can also add your own values to be assigned to the template as a part of the parameters as well. So if you have other sources that you want to pull in information from, you can make them part of that Buildy queue and assign the result of whatever those functions are to the template as well.
And do you have an example of that being used? I was just curious to see.
Yeah, I hope so.
It seems like it could help for certain things like licenses or version numbers or that type of thing to put into files.
I don't have one up on the README, but I will definitely put one up after this, just so you can see how it works.
Seems like you could even potentially use it for pre-compiling templates and then, dumping them into an HTML file or even into JavaScript strings.
Yeah, if you want to use it as a template processing tool, you can definitely do that, for sure. But I'm not taking over Ryan's excellent Celic template processing tool, but that might even become one of the tasks inside Buildy as well. So
I'm thinking about ways that Celic could actually use Buildy to carry out its actions, because it does a lot of stuff that follows this kind of a workflow where it takes a bunch of files and then processes them and then does things to them. And right now it all does it, just manually coded to do all this stuff. But it would be really sweet if I could just use the Buildy style API to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
With the same logic that YUI gets value out of componentizing reusable chunks of code into modules, we can make reusable tasks for building in different environments. So.
Same goes for API documentation as well. Pretty much anything you can think of.
So I'm curious to see the source of, say, one of the existing tasks, if we want to dive into the source code for one of the existing tasks, and also where those tasks are added into the queue or made available for queue instances to reference by name, just the specifics of how that's done.
So, oops.
It's up on GitHub too, right?
Yeah, it is. I should probably go through the GitHub version. Be a lot nicer. So, the way tasks are made available is through the registry object. The registry object basically can load directories of tasks, like I said before. I'll show you just the concatenate task. So, the way they're made available is basically by exporting a property of the the module with the name of the task, and then a callback option for what the callback will be to execute that task.
So you can have one task file that's exporting multiple tasks if you want to, but
yeah,
I do like the idea of having individual tasks defined in files, but maybe it makes sense in some cases to have related a family of tasks that work together.
Yeah, I thought about just having one file per task, but then in the case of Uglify, there's quite a lot of different options Uglify, so you might end up exporting 3 or 4 different tasks from the one file, but reusing your same function to do all of those things. So that's why you can have multiple tasks in one file.
Can a task add another task in itself? So during the execution of that task, it can, I guess it's executing in the context of the queue itself, so it should be able to insert a task, right?
Yeah, a task is executed in the context of the queue, so you can add more tasks or execute other tasks or add tasks inside the execution of a task.
I guess yeah, if you need to fork off to something that's a little more complex that you don't want to encapsulate just inline in the processing of that task, you actually want that task to be bottled up somewhere else. You can reference it by name, add that task by name to the queue. But then that opens up the question of where in the queue that's going to fall and being able to control task order inside of the queue. Do you have controls for moving tasks around inside or promoting them, or is it all statically declared?
It's all statically declared. I guess, it's not impossible to move the tasks around. They're only stored in an array.
It's just JavaScript, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But we can definitely make an API for that if we find a good case for it. I don't know.
Seems like the only case for that would be if a task is, during the execution of a task it needs to fork off to another task. It would probably want to do that. Task immediately or immediately after or something like that. But
yeah. It certainly opens up a lot of possibilities. So I guess even I'm just thinking about the kind of complexities you could introduce by calling tasks from a subtask or making new queues out of a subtask. So at the moment I've kept the examples and things kind of basic. I haven't introduced sub-queues within tasks and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's certainly possible.
So Evan is asking in chat if there's just a question about the forked task. If you call the forked task, then another task is after the forked task. That task is guaranteed to execute after both of the forked tasks. In your example case, we're done.
Okay, that's the intended implementation, but if you see in all of my examples at the moment, the fork task is basically the end of the line for that particular queue. So at the moment, there isn't chaining on the end of a fork task, but there definitely will be in future.
Okay. All right.
Yep. As well, as far as building YUI modules, that's really what ybuild is for. You don't have to construct a Buildy queue to build YUI modules because ybuild is sort of a self-contained thing that takes over from YUI Builder. Should probably talk about that a tiny bit, although there's not a lot to show. ybuild is basically command line utility, which acts the same as the YUI Builder. Doesn't have a lot of options. As per everyone's recommendation, it doesn't have a lot of output either. So basically, the main parameter is either a list of directories, or you can use the shell matching to supply a list of directories to build. So when it runs through all of those directories that you specify, it'll go looking for a build.json file. Usually, you can actually change that as part of the command line parameters. There's an example on the ybuild site of a module, and it's very similar to the build.properties file that you would have for YUI Builder.
But in the language that we all know and love.
Yes. So, yeah, most of the options are almost exactly the same as what they would be in the build.properties file. Excepting that you can configure individual tasks to behave a certain way, such as if you want the JSLint tasks to use special options, then you can put that in the build.json as well. If you check the repository, you find a couple of examples. There's the module example, and that's pretty much your standard YUI module layout, and a build.json file which explains pretty much most of the cases you're going to use for gallery modules and things like that.
So Brian Miller asks what the recommended version of Node is.
I've been developing this through 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, but at the moment I'm developing it against 0.6.10, so pretty much the latest stable version.
Are you?
I can't see a reason why it wouldn't work with the previous ones, but yeah.
Dave is asking if it works on Windows.
Wait, Dave is asking that?
Dave is asking if it works on Windows.
What is Dave care?
I guess he's playing devil's advocate. Okay, I will test it on Windows. I haven't tested it on Windows, actually. This is
maybe Dave just wants to make sure that it doesn't work on Windows.
Yeah, like again, I haven't used any kind of API that's really specific to Linux or Unix or anything like that. But I'll do some testing for you, Dave, and if I find any bugs, I'll squash them straight away.
Excellent.
So theoretically, with Node supporting Windows now with version 0.6, would it just be maybe if certain dependencies or certain APIs that are being used may have to change to make sure that it would work?
All of the kind of file system APIs that are being used are from the FS module. So unless there's something in Node's FS module that doesn't work on Windows, I'm not aware of anything. It should be fine. But I'll definitely make sure that it works on Windows. This
Dave,
is really just the first step. Yeah, Dave, you should mic up.
So he makes a comment about. Oh, I guess you're reading the comments right now. When you're looking at the when you're looking at the Connect window, then all we see is a blue screen.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I was just checking his comments.
Okay.
Yeah. I definitely think it's important to have it working on all platforms, because obviously people developing with YUI are not exclusively Mac OS X or Linux users, so that's definitely on the cards. But this is the state of it today.
It's looking really good, though.
Yeah, it looks pretty awesome. Is there a chance we could see it in action, just to see what the full Buildy ybuild experience is?
Not much of an experience, but here we go. So, oops.
My question is, who's going to be the first one to ask for colored output?
I had colored output in there before, but there's not enough output to color now.
What we need is Unicode check marks.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Unicode checkmarks it is.
Jay wins. It's asking to color your LS output.
So yeah,
That's cool.
that's that module build. This is more or less copying the output of the YUI builder. Stephen had an excellent suggestion to use the lint output as sort of a HTML report. So I'll definitely take a look at that, because I agree that the lint output's not that easy to read as it's flying past doing thousands of builds and stuff.
Right, having to scroll back up to read it is a pain in the ass. Yeah.
This is
And
still
also
such a
getting
huge
the lint
improvement
output.
over the current, YUI builder output, where you get like tons of just ant info messages, and then somewhere in there your lint output is, merged in between like the YUI compressor output and all your files that have been written and all the status messages, and so.
Right, and then getting all of them 3 times, once for each debug min and raw version.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and trying to program in XML is just such a mind warp that it's so hard to get simple stuff done, I feel like. And I've messed with trying to do ant stuff, so it's much nicer to think of just being able to write things in JavaScript or wondering what the hell is going on, being able to look at the source and understand it and not have to go look up what every little thing is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And most of the people familiar with YUI are pretty expert at JavaScript anyway, so they can figure out what it's doing and they can add their own bits. So
it's a byproduct of using YUI, knowing what they're doing in JavaScript. So the Foxtrot's asking if you can define multiple modules in one build.json, or you need to define multiple JSON files.
You need to define multiple JSON files. Sorry,
Okay.
Foxtrot. There may be sort of a recursive build in ybuild in future, where one JSON file can define subtasks or sub-builds. But at the moment, you need one per module.
So is the only thing that's keeping, is it Buildy that doesn't have support for this, or ybuild that doesn't have support for this for the Intel modules, the language packs?
It's ybuild doesn't have support for the language packs.
Okay.
Yep.
So is that the only outstanding parity test that we
No. ybuild is still behind YUI Builder as far as features go, because it's just covering at the moment the basic module that contains JavaScript and style sheets. The roll-ups are not there.
Well, so we've actually we basically moved away from doing the roll-ups, at least in the core library.
Yeah. Some people are still asking for them.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Well,
I'll have to ask Dave.
You could do just with your standard Buildy tasks. You could have a task that combines files and creates a role.
Yeah, you could definitely do that. Yeah.
It sounds like definitely one of the things that YUI would need is the ability to build multiple modules. Like for the app framework, for example, when we want to build the app framework, we want to build model and view and router and app all at once.
They just happen to be hosted in the same directory.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing with data table. There's a bunch of modules that come out of the data table directory too.
Yep.
But I'm looking forward to actually working with Buildy or working in JavaScript to deploy only the CSS files that are relevant to the proper build directories, because right now the YUI builder slaps the CSS, all built CSS files into all of the build directories that happen to be hosted from that component directory. And so I have like data table scrolls, CSS files showing up in build data table base assets. That's a real nuisance. Our gitignore file is a lot uglier for it. But I would take care of that in XML if I had the stomach for programming in XML, but
Yeah, I think that's
we're just
the
doing it
position many of us take. It's like we could fix that, but we'd have to touch the XML.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the only other thing that I would be personally interested in for a task from Buildy, that maybe this is something that I could just build myself, would be that Builder, that I had added a task to Builder to build out our test files from source files into test modules, just so that they go through the build process and go through the linting and everything like that. And I didn't know if you had support for that, but I had suspected that ybuild doesn't have support for that yet. Is there? Right now, ybuild doesn't have a notion of targets. It's just build it, and it's what is effectively the ant-all process right now.
Yeah, it's effectively just what the ant-all does at the moment. It's really just something to take care of building an entire Buildy queue for you, and I'm still working on expanding it to fit all the same features of YUI Builder.
So I've heard, and this may be secret proprietary internal information, so I may get fired for sharing this.
Shortly after.
Yeah, it'll be on TechCrunch pretty soon. Now, I've heard that Yahoo Search is actually starting to use Buildy internally for some stuff.
Ooh.
Okay.
So, Eamon, your work is now powering the code that's served to, what, a couple 100 million people?
Well, I don't know if it's powering all of it, or if it's powering it yet, or if it will be powering some of it soon. But yeah, I've heard that they're at least looking at Buildy, and they like it. So.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. It's definitely looking promising, but there's so many more things I want to add, which I'll never have unlimited time for. But yeah,
so there was the question often comes up, and I know that you've answered this question a couple times in IRC, but for folks that are just watching the recording and don't hang out in IRC, do you want to discuss the what other projects that are serving in the Buildy role of a Node-based ant replacement or build tool replacement, and the history with Buildy as far as what you reviewed and then decided to roll your own?
Okay. The first thing that I looked at was trying to recreate the YUI Builder stuff in Jake, which is a pretty popular Node build script tool. And it kind of mimics the way that make files or rake files or whatever work. But I had some problems with the dependencies, creating new dependencies and things like that, and it just didn't work out for me. So I had something in mind as far as the chaining syntax went, and so why not roll my own, basically. I did see that someone else has one with a chaining syntax, but I also wanted the ability to add new tasks into it, or give people the ability to add their own tasks, because not everyone's build setup is going to be the same, obviously.
Yeah, that seems absolutely core, especially in the early days. It's going to give you the advantage of, if you're talking about competitive advantage, then Buildy wins by having the ability to customize it and create new tasks and provide that infrastructure for accepting other tasks from elsewhere or building them and deploying them or sharing them. Yeah, that's a really core and really valuable idea.
Yep.
So
I'm sorry, guys.
wait.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I might have to wrap up.
Sure. Okay. Well, if you don't have any more time, then we can close up. But if you have a couple of minutes, I know that I'm curious about looking at the source of one of the tasks, but I can certainly do that after the call. So.
I'll definitely put up a new example for adding a custom task that can take you all the way through. So yeah, just after this call, I'll write in an example for a custom task, and you guys can check it out and maybe
Awesome.
make your own tasks.
We'll link that up with a video and post it up on the blog and all that.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Well, this is really awesome. I'm absolutely loving it, and certainly the speed of it and the opportunity to code in a familiar API, and the chaining API is really nice. It sounds like it's fairly close to a point where it's practically useful for building YUI widgets, or right now for building YUI components that don't have an Intel dependency. Then it seems like using Build or ybuild is perfectly doable. It's what you're using for Gallery anyway. So
yeah, and for sort of processing my wide.app based applications internally.
Yeah, cool. So everybody, please install this. It's on npm, right?
Yep, it is. Yeah.
Is it just npm
npm
-gi buildy?
Yep, and ybuild.
And ybuild.
If you want to try out ybuild as well. Yep.
Fantastic. That's awesome. So everybody install it, use it, give feedback, write custom tasks. If you have custom tasks that you want to create and share, then you know where to find Mosen. He's in IRC, and I'm sure pull requests are welcome.
Absolutely.
And
just obviously any bugs and issues or suggestions or anything, just send me a message on GitHub and I'll try and integrate it.
Cool. Do you have is your GitHub, are your GitHub repos open to issues?
Probably not.
Hey, issues 1. There you go. You got one.
Yeah. There you go.
Cool.
Yep.
All right. You're all set up then.
All right.
Sweet. Well, thanks for joining us and showing us your wares, and hopefully the next time we'll be talking about them, in how they live and power all of YUI and all of Yahoo and all of so many other sites out there on the world.
I can't wait till the day that we can do git rm -- cached build and just wipe out the whole build directory.
Sweet. All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining us, Mosen. We'll see you in IRC, and everyone else, thanks for calling in. So for Dave and Eric and Ryan and Eamon and everybody else, thanks for connecting up, and we'll see you next week. Or maybe the week after. It kind of depends on what's going on with the PR. But we'll be soon, and keep an eye on YUI blog.
Thanks very much, guys.